On its surface, Divekick simply looks to be an elaborate, impenetrable in-joke designed solely to appeal to the hardcore fighting game community. But if one decides to dig even just a bit deeper, they'll discover that it's actually a fighting game with a surprising amount of depth that distills the genre into its most basic and exciting form, the mind game. In Divekick, gone are the long button combinations and joystick motions of fighting games that came before. Instead, these are replaced by two simple input commands: dive, up into the air, and kick. The game's two simple inputs are able to be customized by the player and attached to nearly any two buttons on the controller. In addition to the basic dive and kick commands, the player can also press both buttons at the same time, be it on the ground or in the air, to execute two different special moves. Typically, the learning curve of a fighting game tends to be that you sit in training mode for hours on end, learning combos, to where eventually being able to correctly input the correct combo commands becomes second nature and is no longer a factor in your performance. This allows the game to shift from becoming about inputting combos correctly into a fast-paced, almost game of chess, where the game becomes about what combos to use and when. The true genius of Divekick is its complete removal of the first half of the fighting game learning curve, allowing the player to jump immediately into the much more complex and frankly fun phase of the game. While local multiplayer is without a doubt the ideal way to play Divekick, the game also includes a story mode and some online play. Story mode has the player choosing a single character to go up against the game's entire roster of Divekickers, with the cutscenes unique to each character you chose sprinkled throughout. The story is wacky and nonsensical as expected, but a lot of the jokes contained references that flew right over my head or just straight up fell flat. And although I understand that the story mode was without a doubt the last thing on the developer's mind when making this game, I can't help but think that the game squandered a massive amount of potential to create a story mode that elicited more than the occasional chuckle. Online play is fairly straightforward. You simply queue up and wait to be matched with another player. The game would usually match me up with a player in a minute or two, but on more than one occasion it took a good 10 minutes to match me up with an opponent. Divekick uses GGPO netcode, the gold standard for online fighting games, a system that handles lag between two consoles with a rollback system that essentially rewinds the game if a disparity between the two consoles and player is detected. These rollbacks rarely ever happen, but it's often frustrating when they do, as many times they'll completely reverse a victory. And the game's online lobbies also feature a stats page where you match another player, displaying victories, losses, as well as your opponent's disconnect rate, which is a nice way to avoid wasting time battling players who just disconnect at the first sign of defeat. There's also a lobby system included with the game, but it only supports a meager 2 players in a room at a time. I guess if 2 friends want to continually fight each other online, this would be nice, but without the ability to gather up a bunch of players into a single room, it really seems to make the lobby system useless. I'm giving Divekick's story a 7 because although the story is wacky and weird as it should be, much of the humor also requires previous knowledge of fighting games and even the real-life fighting game community in order to be appreciated. That's an excessively high barrier to be able to laugh at jokes that really aren't even that funny to begin with. Design gets a 10. The game's packed a surprising amount of depth into this tiny package, and none of the characters seem excessively overpowered, aside from a few exceptions, and even then, those characters are far from unbeatable. Gameplay also gets a 10. This game is a blast to play with no fancy control schemes to have to memorize. Anyone of any skill level can jump into the game and be on a near even playing field with their opponent. The game's got all of the excitement and tension of a regular fighting game without the barrier of difficult controls. Presentation gets another 7 because despite the game's ease of entrance, the game sports a frankly ugly art style which makes the game look cheap or like it was haphazardly thrown together. Also, the game's inconsistent menu controls have caused me to quit back into the main menu in the middle of fighting the final boss on multiple occasions. Overall, I'd say Divekick deserves a solid 8. The game at its core is a great experience, but the game's ancillary features and presentation have a few unfortunate shortcomings that make the overall package slightly less appealing.